Hey everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Phil. Today I am joined by Beth Cougler Blom, who is an author of several books, also a podcast host of a podcast called Facilitating on Purpose. The books are Designed to Engage, How to Create and Facilitate a Great Learning Experience for any group. And the upcoming book, the book that we're really going to be discussing, is Everyday Acts of Facilitation, Learning to Facilitate Through Life's Ordinary Moments. And I will admit that my excitement level of this upcoming book is incredibly high. And the reason it's incredibly high, Beth, is that I think this is a book that is not, it doesn't exist as I know it in the facilitator world at the moment. It's touching on areas that I currently do workshops on, which I'm excited about, which is skills and methods versus props and processes. It's like much more on the what do we do as human beings? And so my first question is, I'd love for you, if you could, to define the word facilitation.
Wow, that is a fun question to throw at me first off. Way to go, Phil. It's crafting moments, I think. Maybe I can say it that way, that it boils down to communication skills. And I think I just kept coming back to that when I was writing this book, that facilitators, when we're really excellent at our job, and that's a process to get there, a journey to get there, we're really excellent communicators. And it's a moment by moment thing, I think. It's micro moments. So I kept thinking about the micro skills of facilitation when I wrote this, and just think about that in my own life and work as well. Just little tiny moments that we facilitate or don't or could really make a difference.
It's fascinating as well, because as I've developed in my career, I've started to realize like the more of the skill, it's more of the methodology, the processes, the thought processes that I have going into it, the way I engage with participants, versus the activities, which I think that when I first started, I was accumulating activities, like fill up my bag of resources that I could deal with situations, but realizing now as I've progressed further, my bag has reduced. Is that something that you had that realization of, as maybe people were asking you for advice and people listening to your podcast, that what would actually be beneficial is maybe talking about the interpersonal, the human being components of facilitating versus the things, the whats?
Yeah, I have my moments. And, if you look at my website right now, you see I'm offering some liberating structures free sessions. So I love the activities for sure. But is that everything? No, absolutely not. I mean, I don't know, I don't even think of it this way usually, but I want to say what is most important to me now, having done this for more than 20 years. Like there's a foundational piece. I'm using my hands. If you're just listening, I'm using my hands. There's a foundation of who we are as a person, as a facilitator, and in the life that we lead, and all of those skills within that I think is just the important piece to get right, quote unquote right, or just strive to do better at that as we go along in life. So I love the activities, but the humanness, the humanity of us in conversation with each other and with ourselves. There's a lot of self-assessment or self-learning I think we have to do as facilitators is the most important piece. How do we just try to be a good person in the world and in this work and appreciate other people who are in our groups really as well. And one of the chapters in the book is early on, it's called Accept Others. And, if we don't appreciate ourselves and what we bring to the work, and then who all of these other folks are in our rooms or in our spaces where we facilitate inside or outside, then we don't have anything, I don't think. I mean, no activity is going to help us if we don't have some of these humanity pieces in place.
Yeah, and also realizing, I think, of the authenticity. And I'm not, sometimes like when people say bring your authentic self, I think that isn't a good enough description. It's almost like when people say read the group, it's like, okay, but what does that actually mean?
Trust the process,
Yeah, there's a lot of those words that people throw
Exactly.
out there, but they don't really. But there's a process or a technique I've offered to newer facilitators when they're struggling, is that think about something else in your life that you're really good and passionate about. So it might be a hobby, or maybe you're good at cooking, but to boil down the parameters by which, or the pieces by which that makes you a good cook, and then say, well, those things can apply to facilitation. Those can be transferred over. That's, I think, that human piece of just it's not just about the activities. And I agree. I'm a gamesmith. Like, I have a light behind me that says play. Like, I'm all about the game. But I just think that I've seen activities that someone will lead be successful and someone else it will flop, and it's the same activity. So what's the missing piece? And I think sometimes the missing piece is maybe emulation of someone else they've seen and tried to mimic, or there's that human characteristic. Has If you look back on yourself in your career as facilitation, is there stuff that you look back on yourself and I don't want to say regret, because I think they're the building blocks of you now, but like, you look back and you think like, yeah, I missed the mark in what I was considering facilitation at a base level.
Yeah, I think when I started, if I think back to those early days, often say it's just throwing spaghetti on a wall. You sort of just put stuff into a workshop and then you stand up and do it. And over time, I've come to the design piece. I think it's why I called my other book Design to Engage, because the more we spend really crafting, I think you said earlier, crafting the experience and what we think it's going to be ahead of time, it just makes it so much easier when we get to the actual time to facilitate. So crafting all of those moments and thinking it through the arc of the experience of people's experience, but how we're going to show up and all of those things, like, it's so much deeper than I originally thought it was. But that's the journey I think we all go on. Like, this book is really for what I call accidental facilitators, and I'm not the only one that says that, right? And I think all of us are accidental facilitators. However we started in whatever type of facilitation we do, that we all sort of fell into this work and then we're trying to figure it out how to do it. So sometimes we emulate others. I think, as you said, we see people and we go, wow, I'd like to be more like her, or more like him. And how do we do that? But really, over time, maybe we do just figure out, well, who am I in this work and how am I going to show up? And then we start thinking, clients who don't pick me, that's okay, because there's someone else out there that is a better fit for them. And I'm fine with that, because we're all different people, and there's enough room for everyone in this work, whatever it looks like. So maybe it's just getting older. We just think, well, I am who I am and take it or
Yeah.
leave it in some respects,
Yeah.
right? But to show I'm growing in my journey, and there's always something that I'm going to learn as well. So there's
You talked about falling in, so many people are nodding their heads listening to this. It's like, yes, most of us have fallen in. There isn't really as well, and there's another reason I'm excited about your book, is that there is not a not a lack of literature in certain areas, but like, there are a lot of activity books. Like, I think you can that I think is almost, I don't know if we need any more to a certain extent. That's a little bit of I think you can do enough with what we've got to an extent. It's more about like the whys versus the whats of what's happening. So how did you fall into facilitation? Like, what was your I just fell in moment?
moments for sure. I think
Moments.
that
Yeah.
that's what I realized as I had the concept of everyday acts of facilitation, and it came from, a group that I was working with at the time, where we kind of started ideating this thing together, and then the group never did anything with it. So I took it on and just mulled it over for years before I did anything with it. But when I started to really dive into the research and the writing of the book, I realized that it was many moments over time which made me the facilitator I am today, and it continues to. We collect moments. So when I was little, I was born into a family that's really large. My mom has 12 brothers and sisters. And so, things like we put on 2 Broadway musicals as a family when I was 11, and when I was, I think 16 or 17. So we, even just being in theater and learning, I grew up singing and being in my musical family, and getting up in front of groups to sing at the festival and that kind of thing, or being on student council, or standing at trade show booths when I was working at a public health unit, and just all of these things that I didn't really know were leading me to the craft of facilitation. But as I look back, I go, oh yeah, that really did. That was one of the nodes or whatever it is along the way that led me to where it is. So when people go, oh, how did you become a facilitator? I think I used to say, oh, I took a 3-day instructional skills workshop, or, I took a transformational speaking course, or, and those things were great and transformational. But when I really dive into why and how I became a facilitator, it was really some more of these life moments that I look back to, and traveling abroad or, like just making the choice to live in a different province where I grew up and having to talk to people and whatever. Like I was kind of a shy kid and went on a journey to not be shy again, anymore, gain facilitation skills along the way, but I never knew I was gaining facilitation skills. I was just kind of gaining communication skills for life, right? And diving into life.
It is interesting. There's Dr. Stuart Brown talks about the play histories. Like if you play in your childhood influences your ability to play as an adult, and I think it applies to many different aspects of like your history. It is interesting the number of facilitators I've spoken to who would either describe themselves or shy as introverted, or that ultimately a large part of why we maybe decided to jump into this career was a little bit of an internal self help or support to a social experience that we weren't happy with, or maybe a light or a school experience that we weren't happy with, and maybe didn't like the teachers, so we wanted to be a better teacher. Like some of those kind of things that seem to play out. It goes back to what I said around like finding the thing you're good at or like you like, and realizing that that can help influence. I think your past is a huge part of the influence. So it's almost like the falling in. It's an intriguing, as I think about like even the language I use around like explaining why I do it, it's like it diminishes the actual experience we have. We didn't fall in. We slowly dipped our toes in, unintentionally or intentionally, and now we're swimming in the deep end quite comfortably.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, my parents were high school teachers, so there's that, right? Like,
Yeah.
people often end up doing something similar to what their parents do in some respects. But they taught me, I mean, I never had them as a teacher in high school. They didn't teach at the high school I went to. So they used facilitation skills in their parenting moments. And, I was lucky enough to have really amazing parents, and I dedicated my first book to them because of that. But and, not I recognize not everybody has that, but I was lucky enough to have that kind of parental facilitation by two lifelong learners who were curious, still continue to be, thank goodness they're still around, right? Curious people about the world. And so got the chance to do things like go to museums and travel. And again, it's a privilege thing. Like I recognize that, but just the family that we're born into sometimes can help us develop the skills of facilitation. And sometimes we get it from our chosen family or other folks in our life, right? That happen to come along the way.
I'm going to read, I'm going to briefly, I'm not going to read all of the chapter titles. I'll save folks there, but I want to highlight a couple because I just want to highlight the kind of breadth of what we're discussing here when we talk about when you're discussing like mindsets and skills. So we've got chapters such as sharing the air, inviting people in, practice empathy, be curious without judgment. As I kind of read some of these chapter titles, as much as it's about facilitation, I think you maybe even brought it up at some point. It's like good human being qualities, right? Like these are so is this as you realize, like, the benefits of all the work, how it's benefited your outside and your real life? Because I I sometimes struggle with the work-life position. I don't think there's a work-life balance, although I think I'm more maybe performative in my work life than I am in my home life. Are these things that you would say are, like, almost like hidden traits or skills or something that we could individually work on? How would
I
you describe these?
Absolutely. I guess I call them mindset skills and strategies because we are often casting around trying to find the right language
Yeah,
in our
of course.
field, that speaks to people. But there's a bit of, people who would read this book may call themselves facilitators or people who are trying to learn facilitation skills. But in some ways, folks who would never call themselves facilitators, I think, would be interested in reading it too and benefit from it because it is life. They are life skills, that they might help us talk to our partners more easily. Or, yes, I do share parenting moments, especially some fails, where I failed doing something as a parent with my daughter and had to get, of course, both my husband's and my daughter's permission to tell some of the stories. Even if people never decided to sort of quote unquote stand up in front of a group or work with a group as a facilitator in some way, my hope is that it does help us communicate more with the people around us, friends, family, the mechanic, the person you run into at the store. I don't know, like, I guess so the other day I was at the grocery store and a woman, a cashier, opened up to me and started telling me about how she had come from an abusive relationship and that she was so happy now, that she'd just been asked to marry her boyfriend, and she showed me the ring, and all I could think of was, I don't even know this person. Like, it's such an interesting encounter, right? Like, why did that person choose to tell me all of this pretty personal stuff in like the 2 minutes that I have with her while, she's checking my groceries out. And it's just one of those examples of an everyday act of facilitation. Like, what did I do to invite her to open up to me in that way? I don't know, right? Was it a look on my face? Was it a smile I gave her as I came up? Was she just telling everyone that came through her cash that day? I don't know, but so many people may not have had that experience if they approached that person, that random person in their life differently. And I just think more deeply about those kind of moments now. And I want more of them as well. So those kind of things benefit my life immensely. I think in the world that we're living in today too, we really need those moments. We need to have those tiny moments of connection with people. And the things that we do and how we approach really can help make them happen.
There's a book that you might be familiar with, Chip and Dan Heath, The Power of Moments.
Yeah, I've read that one.
I was with a colleague and we went into a hotel and we were at the front at the lobby, and we noticed how warm and welcoming the person behind the desk was. Like, oh, how was your drive? It was like things that we would do with a group coming in that they were doing, and it felt like for them it might be like customer service focused, but it was just a warmth that. So then we continued the conversation, got to know her more. We then asked to speak to a supervisor. We gave her a compliment. She ended up getting like a boat, and it made her day. It made our day, and we realized, like, I think that's something that I don't think is happening on the regular. But we're more attuned to the human connection pieces than maybe others are, because it's such a part of our job that as we see people in the same way that you've referenced, someone just started opening up to you, you were more attuned, intentionally or what, there's a behavior that you have because of the practice you do that means that people want to talk. Actually, this is an intriguing one, because I had this question I was asking someone recently. Sociability and charisma. Like people sometimes refer to someone as a charismatic human being, and I think some people can be naturally, maybe, but I would argue that maybe we can probably teach that if you follow some of these things and these mindsets, that maybe that would lead to a higher level of charisma, because I don't necessarily believe it's an untrained skill. I think you can train yourself to be more sociable, like as we've sort of suggested. Would you agree with that?
It's an interesting question. Hey, I think I have a bit of a trigger on the word charisma in a way, because
Yeah.
sometimes I think people can think if they're not charismatic, you think loud, gregarious, whatever. Like, I
Mm.
don't think I'm charismatic in that way. I'm kind of the extroverted introvert. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and can I turn it on a little bit more than normal? Sure, and we have to. Like, there is a performance kind of element to our work as facilitators, yet I'm very clear that we're not performers, and we're supposed to be and we're more effective when we are at an equal level with the group, and whatever
Mhm.
that looks like, right? But yeah, I think there is a way over time that perhaps a naturally reserved person may be able to take on, I don't know, how do we say this? Like, broadened traits. Yet, I have to qualify it because our neurodivergent colleagues also can be great facilitators, and perhaps that's not available to them. So, I don't know. I think over time, we maybe are becoming more aware, more accepting, more used to facilitators of all stripes, and say everyone is allowed to that's kind of a weird word to use, but it's all possible for everyone to be able to do this work if they want to do it. And that's one of the things I say in the book. If you want to be a facilitator and you care about doing this work, no matter who you are or what life challenges you might have, I think you can do it. I know you can do it. And we're waiting for you, because not everybody should look like us, should be like us, should have the same background as you and I, Phil, right? Like, we need everyone to be in this work, in this diverse world we're living in. I don't know. I feel like I get up my soapbox, like, everyone
No,
can
and
do this work. Like, please do it.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yes, and I would also say I had this realization, I don't know, a few years back, of trying to dismiss my own judgment of what I believe to be good facilitation, because I would go into a workshop, like let's say I was at a conference and I'd see someone presenting and I'd go, oof, I don't feel this. I would feel icky, or it would make me feel cringy in the way that, and yet if I actually spent the time to look at other people's reactions, you'd see people really enjoying it. So what I might discern as a great facilitator may not be to other people, and vice versa. So that's that really hard line of being able to give advice in facilitation when we're very subjective. So I think that all of the things that are listed in your chapters aren't narrow enough that they can't apply to all people's. What you're not saying is things like, which I remember hearing when I was first starting, that a facilitator should be quiet and talk less and listen more, and not because you're not a part of the group. And I disagree with that to the extent of what you're saying. I think we should be an even playing field. Like, I'm there, I'm a human being, I'm interacting with them. Yes, I won't see them tomorrow maybe because I'm leaving, but it doesn't mean that right now I'm not a part of them. So sometimes I'd have those kind of moments, be like, oh, that's a very narrow piece of advice. And I would find myself doing similar. And now I'm being a little bit more of like, okay, just because I don't like it doesn't mean it's not good.
Yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
had similar reactions in that way, or like your own reflections on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And that we can't be someone else who's in the work. Like, I might really admire a friend of mine or a co-facilitator and go, oh, I wish I could be more like her, but I will never be her. She's her and I'm me. And I think over time we get more used to just standing in our own body and feet and life to be in this work. But I think I talk about a story in the book about feedback that a co-facilitator got about how the participant didn't like her because she was too kooky or something like that. Like, they used a word like that. She was kooky. Apparently I was okay because I wasn't mentioned. But maybe, somebody else would have not resonated with me as a facilitator, and they would have really resonated with her, like, more vivacious kind of approach. And so I'm okay with that. We certainly can't be all things to all people, as I said before. And I think we just have to sit with that. When the clients say no and they go to a different facilitator, I'm okay with that too, because perhaps they just needed that other presence in that moment. But I mean, there are things that we can self-reflect on. We're growing, and it's not like I don't still make mistakes in this role or regret things that I might have said or done. And, we learn from them. We try to do better, but we have to still be ourselves in the work, yet while learning from others in the work too.
I'm going to ask a maybe challenging question. I don't know. I'm even trying to answer it in my own head as I'm about to ask it. But the word facilitation, you've got facilitating in your title of your podcast. There's facilitation in this. I've struggled a little bit sometimes because I think that the word facilitation, you even reference, like, how do we make this more meaningful to other people who aren't quote unquote facilitators? Is the facilitation, I'm almost like, is it the right word? But then what would we without it? But how are we doing as facilitators about marketing our work? That's that's a bigger question.
Terrible.
What can we do to make people? Yeah, and I feel that too. It's like, I think you and I'm resonating that I think that the work of facilitation, as you suggest, can be all things and can be in all places, and is actually probably the most essential skill of human connection to help this world, and yet people don't know about it enough. So
Yes.
what do you identify maybe the challenges, and what do you consider maybe some of the fixes to try to make it more known to the outside world, that if I said I'm facilitated, they would go, oh yes, I know what that means.
Wow. Yeah, that's the money kind of question,
Mhm.
isn't it? How do we get the people that we don't normally talk to? I mean, before we turn on recording, you mentioned a few people that I also know in
Yeah.
the field, right?
Yeah.
So we often talk to other facilitators, and we all tend to use similar language, and we get what it is. But how do we talk to the people that we don't talk to? And I don't know, it's like one conversation at a time, one client at a time. Even within, like, our biz, so to speak, I've had people go, well, what do you mean when you say facilitation? Like, I think you're using the wrong word, Beth, because that's teaching, and you mean facilitating meetings, right? When you say facilitation, I'm like, no, I use facilitation for both meetings and workshops. Like, that's kind of how I've boiled it down, and I say that early on in the book. Like, that's what I mean when I say facilitation. You're going to facilitate meetings or workshops or some sort of experience, right? Like you might kind of use a
Yeah.
broader term because of the type of facilitation that you do. And so even within we facilitators, people don't use the word as broadly as maybe I do. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I've said it's more of a philosophy than, so like, let's just keep talking about the philosophy behind the word facilitation. And in some way, if you want to say that a trainer has that philosophy, or a teacher or a faculty member, or, whatever the word instructor, right? I
Mm.
don't love some of those words because of some of the embedded sort of mind pictures that you get
Hmm.
when you hear the word instructor, for example.
Yeah.
But if we can talk more about the philosophies behind the words, maybe it doesn't matter so much. Like teach in a facilitative way or instruct in a facilitative way. And what does that mean? But yeah, I don't know. We'll probably still be talking about this 10 years from now.
I
How do
know.
we still explain? I
Well, I
wondered
would
about
say,
that for the cover, like the title of
yeah.
the book, Everyday Acts of Facilitation. Like, would the right people pick it up? And I guess we'll see, because the people that are engineers or some other role that they don't call themselves a facilitator, like I want them to read it too if they lead meetings, if they talk to colleagues at work. And so it might be hard to get to some of those folks just because of that word, but I don't know what to
I
do
think
about that.
no, I think it's a larger problem or challenge that many of us who do the work they do are like, I debate, am I an educator? Well, yes, I am. I teach, but I teach in a facilitated practice. I would say maybe facilitation is the pedagogy, the method of
Yes,
giving information. But I I agree. It's like a very it creates a sense of community, and I really appreciate the community of facilitators. But there's sometimes the creation of community makes it less appealing to the larger mass when it's like it's hard to know. I really struggle with words that our industry uses in terms that we use. I think it's beyond. I'm very clear on using the word reflection rather than debriefing. In the same way, it feels more militaristic to debrief something like a military campaign or something. And my background is in English literature, so that's my degree. So I'm always looking at the words that I say, and I like write down. It's actually a practice. You've got a chapter in here. I'm really intrigued. It says, "Watch yourself in action." This is a strategy that I typically tend to do. As I will record myself when I lead. I won't necessarily video, but I've got like a dictaphone or something, and then I transcribe what I say, and I go through the words. I'm a little bit when you talk a
wow.
design, I'm like I take it to a degree that's a little bit too much for some, but I do think that the words, intentionality of the words that we say can change the meanings in a big way. I'm very clean on saying if I'm asking people for clarification or asking if they need clarification on instructions I give, I'll always ask, what are your questions versus are there any questions? I found that by saying are there, there's an implication that there may not be. And it makes people feel embarrassed if they then ask a question because they didn't think there should be. When you say, what are your questions? There's an implication there are definitely questions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, like those kind of like small things, I think that may be like important. And going back to the facilitation word, that's where I sometimes think like I get it, I know what it means, colleagues know what it means. But if I went to a group and said I'm going to facilitate an experience for you right now, would they necessarily know what it means? So I'm
Yeah.
not sure. But
I love that you think
but I,
about language so deeply that
yeah.
way.
But I will say I appreciate you putting the book out because that I think the essential part is if we kind of like floods the experience of using the word and not hesitating and choosing another word to try to broaden it, but actually explaining it in your book, then that is a really powerful thing for our industry because that kind of puts more literary experience out there to justify the use of the word, right?
I hope so. And then there's also the piece about, like, I talk about being a chameleon in a good way with different people I work with, because if I realize that they call their people trainers and I'm trying to help them learn facilitation skills, I'll use trainers more often. But then I'll have the conversation about, well, some of us, when we hear the word trainer, it does tend to denote like a kind of an information dump sort of experience, like, or it's more like computer training or whatever, like it's a little bit of a different thing. You could consider choosing the word facilitator in the future. That might be a little bit more, in the direction you're going, because if they're hiring me, that's probably the direction they're going. But, so it's like, what words do the group use that I'm working with, and kind of try to use those two to be a little bit more palatable in some respects. I have the same thing in my learning design work because I like learning designer, and a lot of people still say instructional designer, and it's just not a word I love using anymore. But if I'm in post-secondary here in Canada and people have instructional design teams, and I'll immediately switch into, if I hear them using the word instructional designer, I'll immediately go to that. And then I'll maybe try to like teach them the learning design word as I go. But it's just like the chameleon nature. I think that all of us who have been doing the work of this facilitation for a while, like we sort of just, you kind of have to meld with the group a little bit. And there's a
Hmm.
skill in kind of shifting and focusing on what that group particularly needs, yet not losing ourselves in the work, which I've talked about too. We're not going to be inauthentic in doing that, but we shift even our energy levels to match the group, right? Every time I do a podcast episode myself as the host, like I'm slightly different, I think, in terms of how I show up. And I've talked about this too on my podcast. Those mirror neurons are at play, and we kind of sort of change ourselves a little bit to just be a little bit more effective. So it's something unseen that we can kind of talk more about, and enlighten, which is maybe what I've tried to do with all the different chapters of the book too.
If someone was to pick up the book, they read it over a weekend. So the Friday they picked up the book, they're excited, they've read it over the weekend. What do you hope they are thinking about changing, considering on Monday?
I hope that immediately they start walking around in their life, looking at it and experiencing it with new eyes. It's like an extra level of awareness that I want them to have about themselves and about what's going on around them. So, if they take the bus in the morning and they see the bus driver chatting with people, inviting people to talk about their day, whatever, right? Or the opposite of just, growling at everyone or not making eye contact with the people that get on the bus. Like then they go, "Huh, well that's interesting. Like what am I learning from that thing that I've just noticed here? This interaction of these, whether I was involved or not, right, with the people on the bus." So to just raise their awareness to notice more of what's going on them and see if they can practice and shape new experiences for themselves and others. So it's incremental, but it adds up over time.
Well, I appreciate, Beth, you, one, as I've said many times already, for writing the book for me as a facilitator, but I'm starting to realize as well, I'm excited to read it from the perspective of that kind of level of awareness, taking your experience over the past 2 decades plus in terms of the work you're doing, in realizing like, yeah, a facilitator doesn't just benefit another facilitator. Like it's not just, oh, I'm going to help you from my experience from the facilitation to help another facilitator, but actually it could benefit other people in your lives by the skill sets that you've developed over the time. So I just want to send gratitude your way for writing that, because I'm excited by the promise of the book completely. I'm going to throw all of the links to where you can find more information about Beth in the description of this podcast. You're already listening to a podcast, so it's very simple at this point for you to go in your podcast app and go to Facilitating on Purpose and just start listening to those too. So I encourage you to do that as well. And yeah, this has been really cool. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you so much.